Thank you to Congressman Charles Rangel, the highly distinguished, dynamic dean of our New York delegation, one of the greatest members of Congress ever to grace the Republic. Thank you. Colleagues in government, to Mama Dukes, to the distinguished members of the clergy, of course to Reverend Sharpton. We're so thankful for his continued leadership and continues to speak truth to power and be a voice for the voiceless. I was thinking about it as I was on my way up from Brooklyn. Now, Reverend Sharpton kind of reminds me of a superhero, Batman. Every time there's trouble in Gotham, Batman is on the scene. Now, over the years, Reverend Sharpton's changed up his superhero outfits on us. He used to be in tracksuits. Now he's wearing business suits. But every time there's trouble in the hood, Reverend Sharpton's on the scene. And so we're thankful for all that he continues to do. He's gone national, but he still looks out for home. I just stopped by briefly to lend my voice as a current member of the legislature who witnessed firsthand the good things that the Senate Democrats did during the time that they were in office. And you need to hear the record and the facts so you can really process what's going down. Now, on November 6th, we know a majority of New Yorkers voted to put Senate Democrats back in power. And so what has taken place is that a group of radical Republicans in partnership with some renegade Democrats, and let me pause parenthetically right there to note that 3 of the 5 represent majority minority districts. Can I call the names? Senator Malcolm Smith represents a district that's 70% black and Latino. Senator Jeff Klein represents a district that's 55% black, Latino, and Asian. Senator Diane Savino represents a district that's 65% black, Latino, and Asian. Somebody ought to remember that in 2014. But what has happened is that people who were elected to represent communities of color have turned around and cut a deal to undermine the interests of those very same communities. And so this is not really a coalition of conscience, it's a coalition of convenience. It's a backroom power grab, a perversion of the political process, an evisceration of the election. In South America, they just call it a coup d'etat. That's what took place. Now, in order to justify it, what they say is that this is about dysfunction. So essentially what they want to do is say they're saving us from ourselves because when you had the power, allegedly, you were dysfunctional with it. But let's take a look at what actually happened in the brief moment or so that I have left. When the Democrats took control in January of 2009, they inherited the worst economy since the Great Depression. That's right. That was an institutional obstacle as to what they had to deal with. They were out of power, secondly, for over 40 years. Now the Bible tells you if you're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, when you reach the promised land, there's some growing pains necessary in order to manage the situation. And then the last thing that's interesting is that you had a 32-30 majority. That means that every single person in that conference had veto authority over anything that could happen. Wow. And so then you had the so-called Four Amigos, the Gang of Four, who came together and tried to hijack from the very beginning the situation. Who were the members of this gang of four? Carl Kruger. On his way to the federal penitentiary. Can I talk?
Yes.
Aaron Montserrat. On his way to the federal penitentiary. Pedro was spotted. I ain't got enough time to deal with him today. But we know that he's on his way to the federal penitentiary. And the fourth member, I love him like a surrogate father. I'm close to his son. But when Ruben Diaz Sr. is the most rational member of the group, I'm not sure that Lyndon B. Johnson, the master of the Senate, could have effectively dealt with that in the early stages. But despite all of those obstacles, the only real moment of so-called dysfunction was engineered by Dean Skelos and Tom Libis, the Republicans, and Hiram Montserrat and Pedro Espada, who they temporarily convinced to cross over to the other side. I'd also note parenthetically that at that moment, those who were the leaders were Jeff Klein and Malcolm Smith. And so those that presided over the dysfunctional moment are now telling us they're going to rescue us from the dysfunction. But, as I take my seat, think about the things that were done under Democratic leadership. I said earlier they faced the worst crisis since the Great Depression, and instead of balancing the budget on the backs of poor folks in 2009, the first thing they did was adopt the Obama approach and raise taxes on the wealthy and the well-off to make sure that your education and your health care and your children and your seniors were protected. For decades, young people from our community were sent away as nonviolent felons for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years under the draconian Rockefeller drug law. And in partnership with Democrats in the Assembly, it was the Senate Democrats who repealed that draconian law. The NYPD stops, questions, and frisks hundreds of thousands of people each and every year. We found out that not only were they engaging in these rampant Fourth Amendment violations, but they were maintaining the personal information of innocent, law-abiding New Yorkers, the overwhelming majority of whom were black and Latino, name, address, social security number, subjecting them to permanent criminal surveillance and suspicion. But in 2010, we eliminated the NYPD's electronic stop and frisk database. It was done by Eric Adams and the Democrats in the Senate. I don't have time to go through all the accomplishments, but I just have to note that for decades, incarcerated individuals were counted as residents of the upstate communities that they were temporarily located, even though they came from Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant and the Bronx and South Jamaica, Queens, to artificially increase the power of upstate New York to the detriment of folks at home. And it was the Assembly in partnership with the Senate Democrats that became only the second state in the country to repeal inmate-based gerrymandering. It was a tremendous civil rights victory, and they're responsible for helping to make it happen. And so don't talk to me about dysfunction. That wasn't dysfunction, that was progress. And so what's going on is that folks on the other side, this coalition of convenience, wants to stop the progress. Frederick Douglass said to us, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. We're going to make sure that we demand and take back the power that the voters conferred upon the Senate Democrats on November 6th.